Gotta stay hydrated. Need that water! Hey guys, Lit Critic here, the world's best, busiest, and only lit critic. Today we're here to have a discussion, a conversation, if you will, a analysis as well, of feminism. Now before you click off that video, I know you want to click off. I know you do. But hear me out, because we're not just doing feminism, we're also talking about feminist critical perspective, reading perspective, and an analysis using that perspective on a text. The text being Arthur Miller's The Crucible. You might have heard of it. It's a good text, good read. Should give it a read. Cool? Cool. Let's talk about feminism. As if you don't know, feminism is the theory of the political, social, and economic equality of the sexes. It's very important to consider the fact that it is a plural term, because otherwise you would see this as just males, just females, but no, it's both. Very important to note that. Feminism, while it seems like a very legitimate movement, very important to establish equality amongst those institutions and factors, well, let's just say not a lot of people, particularly males, are very pleased with that kind of movement, and they see that, quote-unquote, as male hatred. They're wrong, because feminism isn't really just about targeting males and being like, the patriarchy has to be overthrown. It's more about establishing equality. It's very important to note that. Fortunately, we've seen examples in society recently, in the last few years, that don't see feminism as very legitimate, or sees feminism as, bad. A clear example is of Anita Sarkeesian. If that name rings a bell, you'll know her as the one of the figureheads of the Gamergate movement. Gamergate was basically a movement that targeted the hypersexualization and sexism of video game characters in video games, and how the video game industry treated women in their video games. And that's a very fair topic. We see fighting games with girls with their assets hanging out. I get it, because males are your target demographic and audience, but at the same time, gotta chill a little bit. The thing is that while this is a very easily accessible topic to open up discussion on how females are seen in video games, let's just say Anita Sarkeesian wasn't met with a lot of respect. A lot of males weren't very happy with them trying to take away their sex appeal in video games, instead sorting out very disturbing threats involving a lot of sexual assault and murder to Ms. Sarkeesian. Not very pleasant, basically. Feminism is also mocked very often and is made fun of by people for attempting to try radical things and achieve superiority over males. Again, this isn't part of what feminism is. Feminism is establishing equality. I will say that a lot in this video. But what happens is that some people will just pick out very extreme radical feminists and use them as like a benchmark for their discussion, for their debate against why feminism is this radical thing, when you're really only looking at a minority in comparison to the majority of people who see feminism as this movement to establish equality for institutions, for factors such as social, political, economic. Because at its core, again, it is an avenue, it is a place for discussion and conversation for people regardless of their gender to speak out about these issues and achieve equality for both males and females. Now, the next thing we want to discuss is, what is feminist reading perspective? So, feminist reading perspective is a literary form of criticism where readers are called to read a text through a feminist perspective. It also deals with, the main idea of these readings is to deal with issues such as representation and depiction of women in literature, or the exclusion of women in the literary canon altogether. But you might be asking yourself, who cares? Why is this important? Why is it important to look at texts that already have ideas and themes implemented in their words and phrases and conversations and dialogue? It's important to do this because it offers a variety of interpretations of texts that turn to enhance an understanding other texts, not just for the time that the text was created, but also for a modern context, and how what these ideas offer to readers now. And a majority of feminist readings, as you may see, involve a lot of commentary on the issue of gender politics and the big P word, patriarchy, and how it should be toppled and resolved to establish equality. Cool? Cool. Let's talk about that text. What's this text, you might be asking? You might have heard it already. It is The Crucible by Mr. Arthur Miller. Mr. Arthur Miller, as you may know, is a playwright, very successful, very prominent playwright, who also, you may know his other works, Death of the Salesman and A View from the Bridge, if I'm remembering that correctly. So The Crucible is based off real-life events that we now know as the Salem witch trials that occurred in America in the 16th century, around about. And it was a time of great hysteria, great fear, superstition about how certain individuals in society were accused of witchcraft, sent to trial, some executed rather brutally, and it was a dark time in history. It was a very dark time in history. But Arthur Miller saw this as a good setting, a good time period to write. It's also important to know the context of the writing, that the Salem witch trials happened in the McCarthy era, a time where Joseph McCarthy, a senator in America, was attempting to basically rat out all these communists that were in the American government, in Hollywood. Here to talk about how a feminist reading can enhance our understanding of the text. By using a feminist perspective in this text, we can see two main ideas that we want to discuss. One is that men believe women to be submissive and subservient and weak, and the other one is women's desire to grasp at any semblance, any slither of power. And this is represented through characters of Tituba and Abigail, respectively. We will get to that in just a second, but here is my main thesis. By portraying women as subservient, deceitful, and weak in the face of a male-dominated society or patriarchy, feminist readers are called to challenge the stereotypical character models and blatant misogyny, and instead call for better, empowering representations of women in literature as strong, confident, and independent characters in hopes to normalize outdated representations and stereotypes. When you say mouthfuls like that, gotta stay hydrated. Let's go. Let's talk about Tituba, because our main argument for Tituba's portrayal of her character is as less of a human being and rather a tool used by men of higher status and power. And feminist readers are presented with a character who deserved better than to be exploited because of the blatant misogyny of the time, thus forcing them to challenge the negative representation of women in literature. We need to talk about who Tituba is, because that's important to why these themes are important, and why a feminist reading will enhance this understanding of the text. Because Tituba has a few things going for it. One, she hails from Barbados, and by that she is a Negro, a black woman, in a time where women weren't treated as well, let alone black women, let alone black people in general, weren't treated respectfully. There's obviously a bit of racism, some undertones in this text. Also, her status, her position rather, as a slave for Reverend Paris, who is a man who only really cares for himself, his own reputation, and no one else. Like, even though her daughter, his daughter is might be a witch, might be under the spells of witchcraft, he is more focused on how he is seen in his town of Salem and his reputation, and that's just vile to begin with. And Tituba is also aware that whenever there is trouble, blame, unfortunately, will always fall on her. And this is evidenced towards the end of Act 1, in the extract around page 47 to 50. What we see is after Abigail accuses Tituba of drinking, forcing her to drink blood, of witchcraft as well, Hale and Paris begin questioning Tituba about what she knows in regards to the witchcraft in the woods that happened a few nights ago, a night or two ago. Is also attacked by Hale and Paris in their questioning. Tituba is quite frightened by Hale's oncoming advances, which clues him to her perhaps knowing a bit more, perhaps knowing stuff that he doesn't know. This begins Hale and Paris's questioning of Tituba. And it's not really just a questioning, though. It's more of an interrogation. Hale initiates these back and forth questions. Questions such as, you would be a good Christian woman, Tituba? You love God, Tituba? And when the devil comes to you, does he ever come with another person. These are all responded by her appropriate to what they want to hear and not what is truthful and what is real. Rather, they would prefer to just hear stuff that they would find appropriate to use in their argument, in their case, and to uphold their reputation. Respectively to those questions, Teachable responds by saying she is a good Christian woman, that she loves God with all of her being, and that in question 2, does he ever come with another person, the devil, it is man or woman, was woman. So there's obviously a bit of hesitation there. Head of dialogue, coupled with very quick, fast syntax, reveals how Hale and Paris are employing a form of entrapment and leading a witness into giving them desirable information that will benefit their agenda and reputation, which in this case is to uphold the sanctity and the reputation of the church and its power. Now, this whole leading a witness idea stems from, well, not stems, but rather can be seen in society again, as we have seen in, if you've watched Netflix documentary Making a Murderer. It's fantastic. Give it a look if you haven't. Brendan Dassey, one of the people who was accused of being a co-conspirator in a murder, basically is interrogated by these two men, and they ask questions that seem to lead the witness on into answering what they want to hear, not what actually legit, what is real, what is true, which is reflected a lot in what happens in this part of the text. Now, those ideas by themselves are very substantial, very important, but a feminist reading read a little bit differently. A feminist reading of this is that Hale and Paris' actions are exploitive and manipulative. Hale and Paris are symbolic of the dominating patriarchy, who abuse their power and status to target a woman who is negatively impacted because of her race, because of her status, because of her gender, and because that she can't keep a capable defense of herself during that time. Maybe because of her lack of literacy, because of her upbringing, and because she was a slave, she might not be provided with such benefits. And we see that what Hale and Paris do, this interrogation, it leaves her sobbing in terror, rocking back and forth, very, very scary, very emotional responses. Her weakness is being used against her by males in higher position because of the Puritan society's admiration for religious figures. His characterization of Tituba is one that can be argued is rife with misogyny and disrespect for women, which calls feminist readings to challenge this characterization and choose instead to promote and encourage positive representations of women, empowering representations, particularly of black women who are seen as disenfranchised and disempowered. Final character we want to look at is of Abigail. Now, by applying a feminist perspective to the character of Abigail, feminist readers are able to identify with Abigail's struggle to grasp onto slivers of power in the face of the patriarchy. The big P word is back again. Let's delve into it. Initially, characterization of Abigail, she is deceitful and manipulative, and she's only 17 years old, which brings to mind this youthful angst that is very present in all of us who are of this age in year 12 lit. I can tell a lot of us are very angsty. He uses this deceitfulness and manipulation to heighten hysteria in the town of Salem through rumors and lies about the witchcraft that is occurring at the time. And she is very selfish and attention-seeking. Important to note that this attention-seeking might stem from the affair that she has with one of the main characters of John Proctor. He's a married man, very scandalous at the time. She is stripped of her purity, but then eventually this affair is solved by Proctor himself. He avoids it because, he has a marriage to sustain. That's very important to him, and he doesn't want to fall to lustful temptation. Abigail, on the other hand, doesn't take this very well at all. She has a very emotional outburst to Proctor in the previous scene. What we're looking at is how this anger is channeled by her into a play for attention and deceitfulness, which can be seen while Tituba is still being interrogated just after the aspect we looked at before. So Tituba is being interrogated. Abigail rises the stage direction says, and exclaims, "I want to open myself to the room, to all the people in that room." She says she wants the light of God and the sweet love of Jesus, because who doesn't love Jesus? Amen to that. She starts accusing individuals of conspiring with the devil. That's the important thing here. She chucks out names such as Goody Osborne, Sarah Good, As a few of them are chucked out, a few more are chucked out by Betty, who arises from her slumber and picks up the chance, further accusing people hysterically and with great relief. These quotes, with this evidence, we can see that Abigail could be seen as a ringleader, as evidenced by how Betty is picking up this chant immediately after Abigail starts it. And she focuses on using manipulation and lies about these accusations to ratchet up the hysteria and fear that is already very present in Salem at the point, which leads other characters to fall victim to these rumors as facts, for inspiring social adherence to these rumors, taking them as facts when really they shouldn't be. That's also a very substantial argument to make, but with a feminist reading, we can dive a little bit deeper. Feminist reading, we can see that this might actually be a play for power, play for dominance by Abigail to grasp at any semblance of power, authority, or position which is already dominated by the patriarchy. Now, we can look at that stage direction again. If we look at that rise, it could be seen as a way of her trying to be above the people in the room. This youthful angst, as I've mentioned before, is channeled. This brings her great glee in the accusations and chucking out all these names and manipulating people into taking this as facts. But it's important to note that when all this is happening, when this accusing is at its height, it's the curtain begins to fall as they continue accusing wildly. This could perhaps symbolize how this power that she holds and cherishes is fleeting, because it's an unfortunate indication on how women don't often grasp power, and when they do, it is most likely ignored or slowly fades away into obscurity or is just stripped away. And we can see an example of this in politics. We see this with Elizabeth Warren in Congress when she was silenced by Congress in a hearing for Jeff Sessions, the now Attorney General, which inspired the tattoos, the meme. Nevertheless, she persisted. So Abigail persisted, but she didn't win. While Abigail initially comes off as arrogant and attention-seeking adolescent, a feminist reading offers a more sympathetic view of her character and shows the lengths some females will go in order to feel powerful. Now, in conclusion with this discussion, feminist readings definitively offer further insights into the struggles of women in society and the search for equality, and Miller's The Crucible is no different. Tituba and Abigail are initially seen as submissive and manipulative, respectively. However, a feminist reading gives further insight into the mistreatment of women based off of race, status, and gender, and the women's desire for power, which are revealed to the reader through the feminist reading. While Miller's perspective on female characterization can feel dated, they are fitting for the time, and serve as a reminder of how far we have come since the old-fashioned constructs of gender, and how much further we can go if we work as a collective society to advance towards social, political, and economic equality for both males and females. That is all I have to say. That is all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I am now going to stay hydrated. You guys stay beautiful. Thank you for watching. Good night.